Isle of Wight Volunteer Stories is a podcast brought to you by the Isle of Wight Volunteer Centre, celebrating the wonderful contribution that volunteers make to island life. We'll be hearing about the different roles and activities that people do, what they get out of it, and what motivates them to start in the first place. Volunteers share some of the highs and lows of their lives, talk about the skills that they learn and the connections that they make on their volunteer journey. We hope this podcast will give you an insight into a world you may not be familiar with, will demonstrate that volunteers come from all walks of life, and perhaps it will inspire you to start your own volunteer story. I'm Sandy Cicognani from Community Action Isle of Wight, and I'll be your host on this podcast. In this episode, I talked to Pippa Nicholson about her love of books, the new bookshop at Mottistone Manor, and her love of nature. Hello Pippa, thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
You're welcome. It's lovely to be here.
And could you just start by telling me a little bit about yourself and what volunteering you do at the moment?
I currently volunteer in the Mottistone Manor bookshop. It's a second-hand bookshop that is entirely run by the volunteers, so we have to be here if it opens, and so many people are excited to be able to go into the manor because we haven't been able to open the whole house just yet. So having just the 2 rooms open for the bookshop really is something that a lot of the people that come and visit the site really appreciate, and it also just means that we get to give these books a second chance at someone enjoying them instead of them going somewhere else to, I don't know, become mulch.
And can I ask you what prompted you to volunteer?
Well, I actually work at the site. I work in the tea room, and I live quite close to the site, and it's a place that I really enjoy being. And I also do have 2 degrees in literature. So when they were saying, we're thinking about setting up a second-hand bookshop, I was a bit there like, you've read my CV, haven't you? And it was just one of those things of because I work part-time, I have other days that I'm lucky enough to have some spare time, and I enjoy being on the site so much, and I love spending time with the people here, that it really just it doesn't feel like work. It feels almost like a nice little treat for myself, and I'm going to go over the road and I'm going to sit in an old manor house and just have a nice sort of quiet 2 hours to myself and maybe tell someone about some paintings or some books. So, I mean, it's not as unselfish as people think when you say volunteering.
Excellent. I was going to say, for those who haven't been to Mottistone, how would you describe the place?
Well, I would say that it's in a similar vein to the other old houses that you get on the island. I think they're quite recognisable, which I do believe is because one of the reasons the island has so many old houses is because during the Second World War we weren't important enough to bomb. So we didn't have a lot of blitz damage. So I think it's very reminiscent of that. It's a 15th century house. Which actually the trust wasn't given to the trust until 2020. The actual house was still being lived in by the original family, but they have had the garden since, I think it's the 1930s. So that's why we only have 2 rooms open for the bookshop. We only got hold of the house very recently. So it's honestly, it's just one of those sort of very nice old British houses. When you think of old British houses, it's on the smaller side because it is a house on the island. It's not like any of the big houses you see in Pride and Prejudice adaptations, but it is a very nice old manor house.
Thank you. And the bookshop, I mean, what sort of books do you sell in there? And do you get the chance to talk about literature much while you're there?
Not often, because of course I haven't actually read all of the books in the secondhand bookshop. I've read some of them, because, and it's another reason it's so good to volunteer here, I've donated books myself so I can make some room for newer books. Talking about literature doesn't necessarily come up that often. It's usually more general topics because, maybe someone talks about a genre that they like, or they ask where we get the books from, and then I get to talk about, the donations and everything. But the most common questions we actually get are about the house itself, the family. We do get a couple of questions about Warhorse because, of course, Warrior, the horse that Michael Morpurgo partially based the book on, was based here at the manor. But beyond that, not really many conversations about literature.
So what is it that keeps you coming back here as a volunteer?
The discount. No, like I said, I really like being on site. As a person, I find it easier to plan things if I have something to plan around. So knowing that I'm going to be on site for 2 hours on a certain day means that I can plan the rest of the things that I need to do around that. And it also just feels nice to sort of support the trust in that way, because it's not like a donation, it's my time, and if I've got it, I don't mind giving it. So it's just a pleasant thing to do.
Thank you. Now, a lot of people seem to have the idea that volunteers are all retired people, and I know people can't see you, but you are much younger than I am. So, can you say anything about your experience? Are most of the volunteers here retired, or how do you interact? How does that affect you?
I can't say that they're retired because I don't know what their sort of employment is like, but they all tend to be a bit older, and I do think that is because in order to have the time to volunteer, you need to be able to either not be working or be able to work part-time, and a lot of people that are my age unfortunately just don't have that option. So even if they would like to volunteer, I've got friends who love hearing about my volunteering, who would love to do it, but they need a full-time job in order to be able to support themselves. The only reason I'm really allowed to do it is because I work part-time at the trust and I do still live with my mother. So I do have some of my expenses that are taken care of. It's something that I'm able to pool into. And it's a real shame because I know that a lot more people my age would enjoy, the volunteering aspect. And I know other people my age that work for the trust, so they are paid, and they love their jobs. It is just unfortunately a case that it's not something that we can really afford to do across the board.
Yeah, thank you. And is this your first volunteering role?
I'm trying to think. Volunteering with the trust, yes, it's my first volunteer role. I did do some other volunteer work back when I was up at university. I did volunteer work in the archives of the library, which was fascinating. It was so fun to do. I did my master's in Arthurian literature, so all about King Arthur, and I also studied in Wales, so there's quite a bit there with the original mythology, and the archive specifically, we had just had a lot come in from the International Arthurian Society that really just needed to be gone through, sorted by year, remove anything that's damaging them, like like stainless steel staples, paper clips, that kind of stuff. They need to be replaced with something else. And that was something that I loved doing. I couldn't always understand what was going on, because one of the plus sides of the International Arthurian Society is you get like sort of old airmail from Japan, you get ones written in French, but it was, once again, it was similar to here actually, in that I got to sort of set aside a nice 2 hours where I do something very quiet and quite methodical, and it was just nice to have that time each week where I got to do that when everything else is a bit hectic.
Thank you. That sounds great. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about volunteering or about the National Trust and your relationship with it?
Well, I've worked for the Trust in different roles for a few years now. And I will say, I mean, I can't speak for the National Trust as a whole, but at the very least on the island, I've seen the work that they're doing, and I think that for the most part, the decisions they've made have been very much for the better. When it comes to certain things like the rewilding, it's so great to see that going on, especially when there's so much sort of not industrialization, but there's a lot of new buildings that are constantly going up, and just where the island has such a interesting there's so much biodiversity and there's so much nature that's here, you don't want to necessarily sacrifice it, you want to try and find a way to make them both work. It's really brought certain things to my attention. One of the things that I really like about working for the Trust is previously, when I was based down at Compton, I got to spend some time with one of the rangers. We went on a walk, and I've now become so much better at identifying wildflowers, butterflies. I'm always pushing for the Glanville fritillary. I'm always there like, we've got it in the churchyard, we've got it in the gardens, it's down by the cliffs. If you see one, that's a really good thing, please don't disturb them, that sort of thing, which is just fantastic. And I'm now also starting to try and, I'm saying so much. I'm just starting to be able to identify birds by call now, which I'm really enjoying. I just did it again. But it's one of those things that it's so nice, even if you already love nature, being able to spend that much time, not just around nature itself, but around other people that are knowledgeable about it. You just kind of absorb things by osmosis. And I've really, really enjoyed that. I now have a nature journal. I track every bird, insect that I see. I draw them out, do a little bit of painting. That's another thing that I actually sometimes do if the bookshop is very quiet. Break out some paints. But it's one of those things of it's just a nice environment to be in. And I found it really enriching in my life in general.
Thank you. And it does seem to be a good community amongst the volunteers and staff here.
Oh, all of them are so lovely. It's even the ones I don't know by name yet. You still wave, you have conversations, just going on with everyone. It's lovely to be able to come into work and say, I've seen a Glanville fritillary, and be surrounded by people that care about that sort of thing and get just as excited as you. So it's just really nice because it then fosters that kind of interest in nature that you have, and it's so rewarding.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you for being a volunteer and for coming on this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you would like to find out more about how to volunteer, or if you're an organisation looking for volunteers on the Isle of Wight, please go to our website www.iwvolunteer.org or email us on volunteer@actioniw.org.uk.